Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind podcast, episode 56. Today talking due diligence, and we're going to be talking about the physical problems you might encounter on a site. We can't cover everything, but we are going to be giving away some great tips. Bob's got so much knowledge in this area. So you're in for a treat with episode 56. Let's jump on in. Welcome to episode 56, as I said, due diligence, and we're looking at the physical problems, some of the physical problems you may encounter when you're doing your due diligence on a site. And again, the amazing Bob Anderson is here with me in the podcast studio.
You always give me such a big rap. You're amazing.
Bob, you deserve a big rap.
It sounds like a circus, when you introduce the lion tamer or something.
Well, there's not many people with the experience that you have.
That are still alive.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never seen anyone you know so much so quick. And your ability to, feed those. Anyway, you're all over it and you know it.
Yep.
Always feeling humble. But anyway, you deserve the kudos.
Thank you.
But before we get started into episode 56, giving away a copy of the book, Secrets of Property Millionaires Exposed. And we just finished 3 events, hey?
Oh, what a great 3 events they were.
We did Brisbane, then Sydney, then Melbourne.
Yep.
I think we did Brisbane and then about 3 or 4 weeks later we did Sydney and Melbourne a week apart.
Yeah.
Weren't they great?
Big hit. Everybody loved it. We loved it.
We had
some big names there.
We had big names there. So everyone who came got a copy of the book anyway, apart from 1 or 2 people. And so one of the people winning the book today, he missed out. We just didn't have enough with us. But we had 3 of the authors in this book there.
Yeah, all there. Celebrities.
We had 3 celebrities. They were fantastic. It was just a fantastic event. So we will be repeating those.
Yep.
Look out for those. Listen out for those.
Sign up for those.
Yeah, coming to the town near you. We're still sticking with Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, Bob?
It's a good start. Yep. We may expand.
Really?
Never know.
Oh, you never know with you, do you? You're full of surprises.
Well, I like getting around and talking to people and catching up.
I think that's what people like about any event that we do is we hang out with people afterwards and go for dinner and have drinks and have really chat with everyone.
Yeah, our networking is longer than the actual events.
Yeah, it is a bit like that. But it is fun and people really appreciate it and we love it too. There's nothing better than talking to people that are into the same thing as you.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
Well, very successful 3 events.
They were.
And I think we should repeat them, and we will.
We talked about joint ventures, so we covered joint ventures, and we had some finance accountants and just very specialised property accountants, so 2 different ones, and they were fantastic. And then we had buyer's agent, the amazing Joe Vidello.
Yes, she was there.
And it was great, and a few other tricks and treats up our sleeves. So come to the next one and find out what it's all about.
Yep.
But anyway,
yes,
let's talk about the physical problems that you might encounter. So a due diligence topic. What sort of physical problems might you encounter?
Yeah, so you're right. It's a due diligence discussion, shall we say. Not so much the town planning aspects around due diligence, zoning and size and all those sorts of things, but physical things. Well, a common one would be trees. Trees, I love trees. People think developers don't like trees. Like chopping them down and building buildings. That's not the case at all. But they can be a deal killer in some circumstances. Trees. Years ago, they weren't such a big deal with councils. But of course, councils got more environmentally conscious, and as a result, they are an issue, or they can be. And some councils consider them more of an issue than others. But they're definitely a physical thing. Trees, of course, goes without saying. But the size of the tree, the species of the tree, that can have quite a bearing on your outcome. You could have a tree in the middle of a lot and it could kill it for development potential, say for townhouses, if it's a decent tree and there's some councils perhaps you can chop the tree down, and others you can't even touch it.
Isn't it crazy? Like why the councils are so different? And is that basically, Bob, because of their I'm going to say the word greenies, but because they've got more people
some are more green than others.
Yeah, more green. Is that basically what it's about?
Yeah, it can be. And I had a tree issue once. It was in Toowoomba. People that know Toowoomba, it's about an hour and a half out of Brisbane. Did a 4-pack up there with a mate of mine, and there were street trees right along the street, and they were equally spaced. And we only had one place where we could put our driveway, and it was right where there was a tree. And I knew that. And so I spoke to council earlier, and they said, oh, look, there's ways around it. And there was, eventually. Expensive. It cost me about $5,000 to remove the tree. The crazy thing was that particular tree, and they had them all over the place, all in so many streets, was called a golden rain tree. I don't know the botanical name, but in every council in Australia, they're considered a pest.
Oh my goodness.
Because they shoot, like the roots shoot, and but they wouldn't declare it a pest in their council because they would have to remove them all.
Oh.
And they had streets and suburbs full of these golden rain trees. And so they weren't a pest there, but every other council, some councils actually pay you money to get rid of them.
Oh, what a nightmare.
Yeah. So I got there. I paid money to get rid of it.
Oh.
Weird thing. Yeah, instead of them paying me to get rid of it.
You probably paid enough money to get rid of that one tree that they could have gotten rid of quite a few.
Probably
Could have. I remember learning about trees when I first started learning about development that I was unaware of the whole... It's about how close they are to the boundary as well, because if you've got a tree that's close to a boundary, or if you're buying a property that there's a tree on the other side of the boundary, that impacts you. I remember the first time I realised that, I was like, holy heck.
Yeah.
People just don't know stuff like that.
Particularly if you're going to build close to the boundary on your lot. It's how it affects the roots. And look, I'm no horticulturalist by any means, but I mean, some trees have a deep taproot that goes straight down. Others have, surface roots. And so if you dig up those roots, even though they're on your side of the land, that could adversely affect the tree. And so you have to get an arborist report, and they'll classify the tree. They'll tell you what sort of root system it is. They'll tell you, how close you could build to your own boundary because of a neighbour's tree.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a bit in it.
So, Bob, that's a really good point that you bring up, getting an arborist report. What does an arborist basically, roughly, thumb rule, cost, and how do you come about finding one?
You know what the perfect arborist is?
What?
The least green arborist you can find.
Right.
Because sometimes you can get a favourable report, like you might need to remove a tree, and an arborist can do a report that suggests that it does need removal. It could have, and genuinely sometimes it might have, a disease, or it can be trimmed back. Sometimes, you can get rid of a problem with the tree, not necessarily by removing the whole tree, but at least trimming the branches back. And they might say, look, you could trim them back, let's say 30%. And that might really make a difference to your project. And so you need an arborist report. Sometimes they can classify it and say, look, this is not a protected species in this particular council, so it's fine to remove it. So yeah, arborists can be your friend. They can probably be not your friend. And it's funny, they all go to uni, they all study the same, whatever they study. And
tree cutting down stuff.
Yeah, and tree doctoring and tree everything. But some are greener than others.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you find a least green arborist?
A less green arborist.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Ask some other developers. Ask town planners. Town planners will know. They might have their favourite arborist that they know isn't too hard on them. And it's probably one way of finding out. But yeah, look, there you go, trees. All sorts of issues, different with every council. So
the next one we've got on our list to discuss is sewer pipes. So due diligence around sewer pipes. The interesting thing with sewer pipes, again, different councils, different rules.
Absolutely, and that's so often the case. When you go around the country, I forget that it's something like 500 or 600 councils in the whole of Australia.
I was working with a client today, and Bob jumped on with him, and I remember you telling him, you were a bit more exact, weren't you?
Oh, I think it was like 35 councils in Sydney or something. Yeah, but no, there's plenty of councils around the country. And they have differing opinions on things like sewer pipes. So, I mean, as our due diligence, one of the early things we do is to do a dial before you dig search, just to locate where the sewer pipes are, where the stormwater pipes are, the water reticulation and other services. But some councils allow you to build over top of a sewer and some don't. So it could be a deal killer. If you have a sewer main, let's say, running through your site, let's say a third of the way from the boundary, and you're looking at a 4 townhouse site, that might knock your front 2 townhouses out. You might end up with a 2 townhouse site. So you don't want to pay for a 4 townhouse site and end up only putting 2 townhouses on it. In fact, you wouldn't be able to.
What are your thoughts on building over a sewer? Like, having done as many developments as you have, what are your thoughts on building over
I'm quite
sewers?
happy to do it if I'm allowed and I need to, put it that way. But different rules.
Sounds like a real developer statement there. Yeah.
Different rules apply to that. Some councils, particularly if it's an old sewer pipe, some of the old clay ones, that are in sort of like metre-long sections, you may have to, in some councils might make you lift the pipe up and put a whole new pipe in. Some might ask you to do what they call concrete encasing, where you encase the whole pipe. Some councils, if the pipe is not too old, it's a continuous pipe, you can simply build over it. But so you have to get a permit. It's often called a build over sewer permit or whatever.
That makes sense.
Civil engineer.
That makes absolute sense. To build over a sewer, you have to get a build over sewer permit.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit you have to do on the construction side. So if you're building like a house or a townhouse over top, you have to drop piers down each side of the pipe to actually support the slab. And then they go deeper than the pipe, and adds a bit to the cost. Not a lot. But yeah, I mean, I've had deals. Well, I've had to kill deals because I can't build over a sewer pipe. And the same goes with some other pipes. Stormwater you just mentioned. Yeah, it can be the same situation. Can you build over a stormwater pipe or not? Well, some councils you can, and some you can't.
So how does somebody find out about whether that's really just finding out what the council bylaws are?
The councils will tell you.
Yeah.
You
but
ask.
I think what we're pointing out is that you need to be aware that you need to find out before you jump in and buy something.
Absolutely, and the engineering department at the council will tell you whether you can or can't. There is another way sometimes you can get around it, is say you've got a sewer pipe running across the lot and you can't build over it and it's in the way, you may be able to divert it right around the boundary. So rather than come straight across the block, you can go down one boundary, across the back, and come back down the other boundary.
Have you done that?
Yeah, I have. But it only works in certain circumstances because of the fall. So something like sewage, I think it has to have a fall of 1 in 150 to fall under gravity. And so if you've got a dead flat block, you think when you extend the length of the sewer by running around the boundary, you actually decrease the fall. And it might end up less than the minimum grade, that you're allowed. But you can do it. There's a bit of money in doing that. You have to have chambers, those quite often when you change direction 90 degrees, you have to drop a chamber in. So, I mean, it could be...
What's a chamber?
It's a concrete cylinder container sort of thing with a lid on it.
Oh, okay, got you.
Yeah.
Like a chamber.
Like a chamber, yeah.
okay, got you now, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that could cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 easily, but it could save the day.
And I suppose that's interesting you bringing up that figure, because we had a discussion today. Someone asked us a question about swimming pools, and you said, well, they cost about $20,000 to get rid of.
Yeah.
Around where this person's looking, perhaps.
Yeah.
By the time because they'll end up building over or moving the swimming pool to a different area. And what was interesting was the reaction, that people just think, oh, well, I won't look there, or I won't look at places with swimming pools, but like Bob has just pointed out with that 30 or 40,000 with a sewer pipe, that still can be, it doesn't make things a deal killer.
Gosh, if $15,000 to $20,000, because that's what it costs,
Yeah.
15 to sometimes maybe up to 20. If that kills the deal, then the deal is too skinny, you know. I mean, but I've had to remove pools from time to time. I mean, it's just a cost, and you just take that into account in your feasibility. I had to remove a swimming pool once, but it was on a site where I built 12 townhouses. So it probably cost, current day figures, you know, $1,500 per townhouse, which is nothing. I mean, even a duplex, it's $10,000 a townhouse if you spread the cost, you know, $7,500 to $10,000. Well, that shouldn't kill a deal.
No.
It has an effect. And yeah, but I mean, there's plenty of other things that you could do to you know, waste money or make it up. Yeah, so swimming pools, because they've got to break them up. And they often bring in a rock breaker. I know a business where their whole business is getting rid of swimming pools. And I talked to the guy once, and he said it's a continuous market. And when it tends to happen is when the children grow up and leave home. He said it is a ready market for him because he is a specialist in that area. Not that you probably have to be, but he's made a career out of removing swimming pools. And he said when people keep the swimming pool while they've got kids because the kids want to swim, but you know, it's the maintenance and everything else, particularly when a pool gets older. And he said he just fills in so many swimming pools.
Don't they have a pool guy?
Yeah. So they got a rock breaker. They have to break it up. If it's a concrete pool, I mean, fiberglass pools might be a bit easier, I don't know. But they've got to break it all up for a start. They've got to dig out the concrete and the reinforcing. And then you're left with a big hole. And then that has to be filled and compacted properly. You can't just throw loose fill into it.
Do you know a fiberglass one? Do they have to actually take that fiberglass away? Do they dump that, or they just leave it in the ground?
Oh, you would ask me that.
Yeah,
I've got no idea. Oh. I mean, a fiberglass pool, they might be able to pull it out. I mean, they're put in one piece. They're generally like lowered in on a crane.
But they wouldn't want it left in the ground, really, would they?
No, you can't leave them in the ground because they'll just fill up. It's not just a matter of busting out the bottom of a pool either. To do it properly, you really need, and you've got to watch actually with who you use, because there's some cowboys around that remove pools, and all they do is punch a couple of holes in the bottom of the pool and then smash the sides and the coping in and just fill it with dirt. And they might be the guys that, you know, do it for like $7,000, and you think you got a deal, you got a bargain. Whereas the guy that charges 15 up to 20, they'll get rid of all the concrete and they'll put proper fill, proper gravel that you can compact, and they'll compact it in layers.
So what's the problem with the
cowboy? Build over it.
What you know, the Cowboys with their way of
doing it. Good
footy
team.
Yeah, with their way of doing it. What's the problem with that? Just like
it'll still fill up with water to a degree, and you can't build over it. And some people have gone then to dig the footings and hit the concrete, and then it costs a lot more then to dig it back out. You know, it's just a quick fix. Even if you're not going to build over it, maybe some people that are just, you know, got a house, they've got a pool in the backyard, they don't want it anymore, you know, maybe then, because it's never going to be built on, you could just like smash it up a bit, maybe leave the concrete there.
Because you're not going to develop over that.
No, but when you've got to build over it, you've got to do it properly.
I said that leads me to this question. What if somebody's done that, Bob, and you don't know, and you buy that house, you'd know because it used to be on the plans?
Well, yeah, if you do searches, you might, but like, it's funny what earth movers do to like hide stuff. I was involved in a subdivision many years ago, before I actually became a developer. You might recall I got a job at a real estate agency selling land for a while to get my foot into the market. We were selling a land subdivision, and it was in a cul-de-sac, and we sold it obviously to people who are going to build houses. And all of a sudden, when the first house went in, the backhoe that was digging the footings started hitting stuff, you know, really solid stuff, and it wasn't rock. And when we dug it up, it left a huge hole, and there was a few blocks at the bottom of this cul-de-sac that had this same problem. And what had happened, the contractors who had built the road and built the cul-de-sac, initially, they built it in the wrong place. It was about 4 metres wrong. So what they did is they dug up all the curb and channel, and rather than dump it, they dug a hole and buried it. And so sometime later, you know, when the land was finished and surveyed and people bought it and went to dig footings, they came across all this broken up curb and channel. And it cost them quite a bit to remove it, but then when you remove it, you're left with really big holes. And then, like when you're doing footings and everything, then you end up using heaps of concrete because you're not just filling in the footings, you're filling in all the holes around there. So yeah, there's an example of what happens when a cowboy
And that's just,
goes in there.
that sort of thing is, like if somebody else prior to you buying the site has hired a cowboy,
Yeah.
that's hard to prepare for, isn't it?
Well, you might not know. I mean, we do soil tests, but even on, say, a 4-pack site, we only generally do about 4 bores. And you can easily miss stuff, They'll pick up, if there's natural rock there, a shelf of rock, those sorts of things, they tend to pick that up. But, they might totally miss something like that, that's been buried.
These are real physical aspects that really require due diligence. So what about one of the majors that everyone always goes, oh, asbestos?
Ah, yeah, asbestos. Well, it is an ugly thing. It's people die from it, asbestosis. So
Yes.
it's pretty serious. But just about every house that was built before, 1977, has asbestos. But to what degree? You see some homes that were built in the 50s and 60s, fibro. Remember the fibro? Mm. And so they got asbestos roofs. They got the old Hardy's Super 6 corrugated roofs. They've got asbestos exteriors, some of them, and asbestos interiors. I mean, they're just a walking asbestos factory, those things.
So how do you deal with those, Bobby? That obviously it has to be taken away, but for the average person, you have to get a specialist to do it. What's the cost of removing up the asbestos?
Well, yeah, depending on the amount of asbestos, make sure that the demolisher has an asbestos licence for a start.
There you go, another tip.
Oh, well, I've seen people use a cheaper demolisher that doesn't have asbestos licence and got caught out, and there's huge fines, but there can be fines for the people that engage them as well, so you've got to be a bit careful. It's not just the demolisher, but yeah, it depends on the level of asbestos. And you might be able to demolish a small timber home for $15,000, but if it's got asbestos, it could be 20, 25, 30,000. And what used to happen a lot is that when they were building these houses that had asbestos, in the old days, what the builders used to often do is all their offcuts of asbestos, they'd bury it like under the driveway or the garage. And so I've demolished a lot of older houses that might have been built in the 40s, 50s, maybe even the 60s. And a lot of them had like a separate shed or a garage building. Invariably, when you lift that slab, it's asbestos because that's what they used to do.
So do you have to get a specialist in there?
Well, yeah, but I mean, you would have had a specialist in anyway because the house would have had asbestos in it. And what it is, it's all the offcuts of the asbestos that the builder had. He'd just bury them, and they used to like to bury them under a slab. Not so much the house slab because the house slab's already poured if it had a slab, but under pathways and driveways and that sort of thing.
Oh my goodness!
And yeah, it often costs another $5,000 to $7,000 to get rid of the asbestos that you didn't even know was there. I mean, you get a quote on the house. But quite often, you got this extra asbestos.
Little niggly bits lying about.
Yeah, they buried it in the yard and then under a slab of some sort, a garage, a shed or whatever, or a driveway even.
Yeah, it's quite a problem, isn't it, asbestos? Yeah. It scares people a lot, and it does scare builders, I know.
It should, yeah. It's killed plenty of people.
Where do they put it when they take it away?
There's special places where you can dump it. It's quite expensive to remove asbestos because, it has to be handled very carefully. Mm-hmm. It has to regularly be hosed down so that there's no fibres floating in the air. It has to be packaged up, completely wrapped up, airtight, and the removal has to only go to certain special dumping areas, and everything about it's really expensive. But I wouldn't say it's a deal killer because you can tell. You can tell when you look at the house it's got asbestos in. The demolisher can quote on it, but it's those hidden ones that pop up on you. Burying asbestos, and we talked about burying concrete before. Well, burying asbestos is pretty common.
What about, while we're looking at things that are hidden, mining subsidence?
Oh, well, yeah. So we're talking about mines that are under the ground. I mean, that's not an issue in a lot of places, but it can be in some, like places like Hunter Valley and Newcastle, Ipswich, wherever there's mining. Often it's coal mining. And yeah, it's it's mining subsidence. So what it is the ground can collapse because there's so many mines under there in a lot of places, and some of them are filled up with water over the years, but sometimes they collapse. And if a mine collapses under the ground, it can sometimes cause a bit of a collapse at surface level. You know, we have 2 or 3 shafts collapse at the same time. And that can make a big difference. That can be a deal killer. And you need to get, well, it just depends. In a lot of parts, weren't you, you looked closely at a project, didn't you, in Newcastle?
Yeah, that went really close. I was going to do a joint venture with somebody, one of the people in our community, actually, if you remember.
Well, you like doing that.
Yeah, but there was an issue with mining. In the end, that was okay. But
because I think down there they've already like pre-classified areas of, you know, areas that do have mines that are a no issue, and then some that there's a bit of subsidence, and no doubt some where you simply can't build.
But I do also remember a conversation recently where they were saying some can be built over, so it's not all, but you definitely need to know about it. Eh?
Yeah, I mean, I've built it at Ipswich outside of Brisbane, which is heavily mined for, you know, well over a century. It was mined, and I had to get a specialist engineer, called a mining engineer, and they study all the mining maps, and they can work out how far down the mines are. I mean, a lot of them are crisscrossed all over the place down there. Which ones are on top of each other, which ones have maybe previously collapsed. And they do a report, and they can calculate what the likely effect is at ground level if certain mines collapse.
Crazy.
And then that's reflected in your design for your footings or your slabs, or in some cases the only houses you can build are on like steel posts, and some of those have adjusters on them. And so that every year or two you get a surveyor to come out and they check the levels of the floor, and you might it's a screw system that you can screw up your floor or screw it down and, you know, adjust it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Who organises that? Like, do they keep a record of that, or do you? Like, how does that even happen?
Well, initially, whoever built the houses would have had to have the ground tested for mining subsidence, and then based on the level of mining subsidence, an engineer would have designed the foundations, the footings, or the steel posts or the stanchions, you know, and then part of the recommendation would be that, you know, every 12 months or 2 years or whatever, that they're adjusted, and then, but it's up to the homeowner from then on. I mean, they buy it, whether they get the things adjusted every year or every 10 years, or wait until something, you know, till you start falling downhill, you know, you get out of bed, you stagger backwards because the corner's gone, you know. That's up to them once they own the house. But yeah, I mean, I've seen people really get into trouble buying in mining subsidence areas and not getting a report.
Oh, I remember you telling that story actually about that guy, and it was too close. Tell that story.
Well, it's a sad story because I knew the guy, and he's a lovely guy. But he bought a site expecting to do 5 townhouses. He knew it was in a mining area, so he organised to get a mining subsidence report before he settled on the land. It was a condition of the contract. Anyway, the engineers were quite slow in finishing the report, and he got to a point where he couldn't extend the contract any further, and he had to make a decision on whether to walk away from the deal because the report wasn't ready, or whether to go ahead. He contacted the engineers and they said, look, we're not quite ready, but it looks pretty good. And based on it looks pretty good, he went and settled, only to get the full report back that said basically you couldn't build on it.
Yeah.
And that was a tragedy. So, I mean, ultimately, he should have walked away. I mean, you don't have the report, you don't go ahead. But he did go ahead on a looks like it'll be okay sort of thing, you know, and that was a big mistake.
What would you have not gone ahead?
No, I wouldn't. No, it's too important. As he found out. I'd rather walk away from a deal. I've walked away from so many deals. You know, if I haven't had the time to get the right answers, I'll walk away. If I haven't got the right answers, I'll definitely walk away.
And that's what you always say, never get emotional. So he became emotional because he wanted it. That's emotion, not fact.
Yeah. To steal the words from another person who said, the best deals, well, words to this effect, it's not word perfect, but the best deals I ever did were the deals I didn't do. I think it was more to do with investments, but if you're talking about a property developer, I think it's relevant, and I could say that, I could adopt those words and say the best projects I ever did were the projects I never did, meaning I'd walked away from quite a few, but I saved myself a lot of problems by walking away. So that was a good deal. A good deal can be saying no.
And this is just the importance of due diligence. There's just stuff that has to be covered off, things that you really need to do. So we've talked about trees, we've talked about sewer pipes, stormwater pipes, swimming pools, asbestos and mining subsidence. And there's nowhere near an exhausted list, but they are some things that you might need to just be aware of, and how to deal with them.
Absolutely.
And I suppose if all else fails, what do? Walk away.
Oh, if you don't get the answers you want, you walk away. I mean, you don't want to take risks.
No.
That was a big risk, that example I just said. That's setting back years.
Yeah. And while we're on investments, or if you aren't going to do a development but you would like to be involved in a property development investment?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of people at the moment that are sort of sitting on the fence, not sure what's going on. Rising interest rates, and we got a bit to go yet, don't worry, on rising interest rates, talking about inflation, all sorts of things. Some people are just sitting back, I know that, because I talk to a lot of people.
We had our live Q&A tonight.
Yeah. And so some people are saying, look, I'm just going to let the market sort itself out. Bill costs are still rising, prices in some cities have flattened or even gone a bit backwards, interest rates are on the rise up. To me, that's not doom and gloom. I've lived through 40 years of ups and downs, no big deal for me, but there are people who a little bit more conservative perhaps, who just want to just sit on the sidelines for a while and watch. And so we do have an investment at the moment in one of our projects. Well, it's a project that we love, and it's a retirement village, in fact. And we had an initial capital raising, and now it's reached a stage where it's fully approved. We bought the site initially, we've got the development permit, got a building permit, we've moved on from that, we've done some construction of roads and sewers. We've had our marketers, the top marketers in Australia, on the job, and they've got quite a lot of deposits. So now we've got our next stage of capital raising, which is to do the civil construction in stage one, moving on to house construction. And so if you'd like to know a little bit more about that,
send us an email.
Send us an email and we'll send you some information. So, if it's the sort of thing you want to invest in one of our projects, not newcomers, 40 years a developer. What should they do?
Email admin@propertymastermind.com.au. There'll be a link below. So, if you're interested in, it's not having a profit share. So it's you get shares in it, and it's a dividend paid on shares.
You get a return on your capital.
Yeah.
And a very safe return. I can explain that to you later.
Yeah.
I've done probably over $300 million worth of projects where I've raised funds, I've done joint ventures, and everyone's happy.
So anyway, we're on Tranche 2. So if you're interested in learning about that.
Yeah, want to come and do a deal with us?
Why not? We do a bit of an earn and learn. But if you want more information, just reach out and we will get back to you with some information. It's pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, Bob, I think that's enough.
Yep.
I think we don't want to overload people, but I hope we always give enough good content where people listen and go, yeah, good stuff.
Well, if it stops somebody from making an expensive mistake, it's certainly well worth it.
Oh, yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for the invitation yet again.
I think next week might go back to an interview. We had a lot of response on that one.
Let's do an interview.
Okay, we'll do one.
You'll be a little bit older next week.
Oh, yes. It's my birthday in a couple of days. I will be.
You will be.
You'll hardly recognise me.
I know. I've seen you going through the cupboards looking for what I bought you, as is your style.
Yeah. Hashtag doesn't really like surprises, likes to hunt them down.
Oh, dear. Anyway, these are well hidden.
Oh, I'll find them. I've got a couple of days left. Anyway, that is the end of episode 56. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week for episode 57. Catch you soon.
Bye.
Bye.